Hello, and welcome to week 2 of remote instruction. So today I'm going to be giving the first half of the program evaluation lecture. Again, I'm trying to do these in roughly 20-minute chunks, so I will do the first half of the lecture in this video, and there should be a second video that will follow shortly with the second half. So let's go ahead and get started. So program evaluation is an extremely important activity for community psychologists. Oftentimes it's our bread and butter. So we a while back, well, at the very beginning of the semester, we did a little activity where I had you look for jobs with a community psych sort of background. And program evaluation is one of those skills that's really bread and butter and that you can actually make a living doing. It's a lot of what I've done over the years for nonprofit agencies, and it's an important thing to do, and it's important for several reasons. Number one, it can document what works, and by doing so, it can help us make decisions about using resources. So is a program worth funding? Well, that in part can be answered by whether or not it's actually doing what it says it does. The other part, if you ever find yourself working in a job that requires writing grants, you're going to have to do program evaluation nowadays. To get grant funding, the vast majority of the time, the funding agency wants to see some sort of evaluation plan. It can also help us make decisions about what kinds of programs we should be using, so it can justify one particular model over another. And it's also a way to establish trust with stakeholders. But there's a number of reasons why agencies or organizations do not evaluate their programs. Number one, if a program evaluation is done right, by nature, there's no guarantee it's going to show its results. And a good program evaluation should be able to demonstrate that a program does work, but also that it should be able to demonstrate that it does not work. So there's no guarantee that the results are going to be positive. Number two, this is a skill set that's not very common. Folks that work at nonprofit agencies have a lot of skills, but oftentimes program evaluation isn't really one of those skills. So they're often not done because maybe nobody in the organization knows how to do a good evaluation. Another reason is resources. These evaluations do take resources, and they have to come from somewhere. So if you've got an agency that's already stretched, doing an evaluation may pose an undue burden. Number four, it can lead to some political vulnerability. So opponents to a particular program may misconstrue any negative results that come with a program evaluation, even if the overall picture is good. So that can create some problems as well. You're basically giving your opponents ammunition to criticize you potentially. And a final reason is superseding value sets. The values of the program and what the program does is more important than whether or not the program is effective. So, is it based mainly on beliefs about the morality of the program, or is it whether or not the program actually is effective in meeting its goals? So those are some reasons they're not done. There's also some, I guess, ways to sort of justify not doing program evaluation. Again, trust and values is often invoked as a reason not to do program evaluation. So our reputation precedes us, right? So our reputation is so good that we don't really need to do a program evaluation. Another version of this is what we do is so complicated that it really can't be measured anyway, which I say is 99% of the time nonsense, because we can measure all kinds of things. In fact, as psychologists, that's what we're trained to do, is to operationalize, abstract constructs so they're measurable. So that I find to be a hollow argument a lot of the time, although it's made fairly frequently. And finally, the programs whose values are consistent with social policies that are popular may be justification enough for the program to exist without a formal evaluation. And so, an example of this might be, you see these billboards around Watauga County for pregnancy counseling, and what those typically are faith-based organizations that are pro-life, that are basically designed to prevent or to discourage pregnant women from seeking an abortion. And whether or not they work is to do that, or to ensure the health or safety of the mother, that's not, as far as I can tell, has not really been evaluated in a systematic way. But because the mission of those agencies is consistent with the mission of faith-based organizations, they continue to be supported. There's another set of not program evaluation activities that look sort of like it, or are kind of halfway there, but not really quite full program evaluations. And so most commonly, these involve lists of processes and outputs. So here are the programs we've run, and here are the people we serve. So we serve 25 kids through our mentoring program. That's good. That's information, but it's not a program evaluation. We don't know how those 25 kids were impacted by that mentoring program, what the outcomes of that those mentoring activities were. While those data can be useful, they don't answer the question of whether they're effective at addressing the problems. Are they, we served 25 kids. How much mentoring did they get? How often? Were there unintended side effects? So, did we get some bad mentors in there, and could that be a problem? And if we're not looking out for that and considering it a possibility, it can become a liability. So simply saying that we did a thing and served X number of people is not adequate for true program evaluation. So we can roughly break down program evaluation into two pieces. The one that's probably most familiar to you is outcome evaluation. And this provides a verdict on whether the program did what it was supposed to do. Did it work? And oftentimes those are the more important, or the most important goals that we want to test with a program evaluation. But there's another side to this, and that's process evaluation. Process evaluation involves measuring program performance and looking for ways to improve it. And so process evaluations are important because they can tell us, they can complement an outcome evaluation and tell us, well, if a program didn't work, if the outcomes weren't there, why? So it can point us in directions of how we can fix programs or make them more efficient. So basically, if a program fails, you can attribute that that failure to gain outcomes to two possible causes. One is program theory. So is the program theory inaccurate? So the program theory is the rationale for why a particular program will address a particular problem in a target population and within a particular context. So does the program actually get at the root of the problem? The other possibility here is program implementation. Program implementation is the degree to which a program is used as intended, or is it operating as it was meant to? So those are two main goals of process evaluations. And the main question that process evaluation answers is, why did a program work or not? And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And so I'm pretty confident that we've discussed this in class before. We want to think about why a program is designed the way it is. And so we need to think about systematically our assumptions about why a problem exists. That's our problem theory, right? So why does drug use occur? I think we did this example in class at one point. Why do people use drugs? Well, it could be that it's a way to escape and relieve stress. It could be that because drugs are available. And those would be two different problem theories. And, depending on our beliefs, those would lead to very different programs. So, if we thought people use drugs because of stress, it would make sense then to design an intervention that tries to reduce people's stress without drugs, right? If we think people use drugs because they're there, because they're available, we might design a program instead to reduce the availability of drugs. And so, we try to design programs in a way that the program theory matches the problem theory. And furthermore, we want a program to really reflect the reality of the situation. So we want the program theory to match the program context. We want the program to affect variables specified by the problem theory. So if it is availability, does our program address the availability of drugs in a particular community given that particular context? And so we want to avoid theory failure. So if say we design a program, we adequately implement the program, it reduces the availability of drugs, and people are still using drugs. Well, that means that our program theory was inaccurate. That we're addressing an issue that is not at the root cause of drug use. And on the flip side, suppose we implement a program, and it's intended to reduce the availability of drugs, but we can't. We were unable to, say, implement it fully, and there were problems with resources or something like that. And we then didn't actually interrupt the supply of drugs or reduce the availability of drugs. Well, our theory might still be right, but we wouldn't know because we didn't implement the program adequately. So that's sort of the logic of thinking through program evaluation. And so usually we start program evaluation and even program development with a logic model. And this is just a graphic representation of how a program is expected to work. And what it is meant to do is to show the connections that are that we think exist between the conditions, whatever's going on in the community, that contribute to the problem, so the problem theory, connecting that with the program theory, what this particular thing that we're doing is supposed to accomplish, connecting that to implementation, and connecting those to expected outcomes that would be measured. And so the logic models serve as a conceptual map of how we expect things to happen. And so it looks basically like this. So your typical logic model looks like some variation of this. So we have a set of conditions that lead to a set of activities that lead to a set of outcomes, and then finally lead to a set of impacts. And so we'll start with conditions. So let me move this down here. So conditions are an assessment of the factors that contribute to the need for an intervention. So these could be risk factors or processes. So, you know, to take a community example, these could be things like poverty or drug availability or lack of health care or those sorts of things. It could be organizational difficulties. So it could be mistrust of the police, for example. And it could just be challenges or problems more generally, a lack of a tax base or a lack of financial resources in a given community. And so we think about all of those factors that contribute to the problem. And then we also examine, what do we have to work with here? So what are the inputs? Inputs are the resources required for implementation of a program. You know, all programs take some resources to do. And we've got to think about what's available for us to use. So, you know, the important thing is that you think about your assumptions that you're making about how particular conditions lead to particular problems. So again, going back to adolescents drinking. So we may believe that adolescents are drinking because they have access to alcohol. So that's our conditions, and our inputs in this particular case with our example is Western Youth Network, and this class are the inputs. So we have those resources to implement something. So our conditions should lead us to a set of activities. So what's the intervention that would address that particular condition? And so these are any events or actions undertaken as part of the program, and usually you may have one or you may have more than one activity proposed. And so activities need to align both with the conditions and the inputs. So do they address the reason the problem is occurring, and can they be accomplished with the available resources? And so activities lead to outputs. So conditions lead to have inputs, activities have outputs. Outputs are anything that's there because of the program. Anything that's there that wasn't there before. And so each activity should be connected to an output. And so examples of activities, law enforcement conducting ID checks to an enforcement campaign where they set up alcohol or vape purchases and write citations for those who do not ID during an alcohol or a vape purchase. And so that's the activity. We're doing this enforcement campaign. The output would be the number of enforcement buys that are conducted, or the number of citations written for failure to check IDs. So we did something and there was a resulting output. Those activities should lead then to outcomes. So if we successfully complete the activity for a particular condition, something should change as a result. So generally, those outcomes are changes in knowledge, attitudes, or behavior. And all of those we can then assess. So we typically in psychology put the most value on behavior change. So behavior change is often the most desirable outcome. It's one thing to change the way people think or the knowledge that they have. It's another thing to change how they act. And that's oftentimes the most important thing we can change is what people actually do. But there can be other things, acquisition of a skill, change in a practice or policy, or even change in a law. And so the example here might be, so conditions, adolescents are getting alcohol. The activity, we do enforcement checks. The outcome is that adolescents report less availability of alcohol and maybe less drinking behavior as a result. So that would be our desired outcome in this situation. And finally, we hope to have a broader impact. So impacts are the what happens as a result of sustained implementation of the program. So ultimately, in the example we've been using, we want kids drinking less. And not only do we want specific, kids in our community drinking less, we want all of the good things that come with less frequent adolescent drinking. So this could be fewer arrests, fewer DUIs, fewer domestic violence incidents. And so the impact you can think of, the outcome is the immediate result of a program. The impact is the broader community-wide results that could be occur over a longer length of time. So over time, we might, alcohol is less available to adolescents immediately, but as a long-term broader impact, it could be there are fewer arrests, there are fewer traffic accidents, there are fewer DUIs, those sorts of things. And so those are really measures of community level changes. So that's what we look at in epidemiology and public health. So I'm going to stop there. That's about half of this lecture. I haven't quite gotten your questions yet for this one, so I'll try to add those to an additional video. So look for the second half of this to appear shortly. I hope everybody's well. Hope everybody's taking care of themselves.